Welcome to the Retzel Health Law Hotspot. Health Law Hotspot is a podcast for physicians and health professionals that covers the legal issues and trends that affect the healthcare industry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Health Law Hotspot. I'm Ericka Adler, shareholder and leader of the healthcare practice group at Retzel and Andrus. And today I am joined by Paige Kuffel, who's an account executive at Bluestone Advisors, which is an insurance brokerage firm. And she specializes in working in the healthcare sector with physicians. So today we're going to be talking about some very common mistakes that doctors make when it comes to malpractice insurance. And this is the topic that comes up in almost every discussion I have with my clients, every contract I cover with them. Malpractice is such a big issue, and there is so much that doctors don't understand. So, Paige, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
So today, like I said, we're going to talk about mistakes. So you and I talked a little bit beforehand to there were so many mistakes, so we just chose a few. So I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the mistakes that you see clients making just kind of on a day-to-day basis? And I think that'll be really educational.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that one of the topics we talked about was understanding what their policy is and asking the employer whether or not they should have claims made coverage or occurrence, and is there an option for that? Having the occurrence policy, it alleviates that tail premium upon leaving. So I think always asking your employer what your coverage options are and who that broker is that they work with. I think that's super important to understand, as well as just asking who that insurance carrier is, if they're a viable carrier for the practice, and just trying to understand what your policy looks like. I think having the mindset as if it is a legal document, the policy is a legal document to have that's in place. So just understanding and talking to your broker about what your policy is and what it covers. There are, sometimes instances where they're, might say, well, is there coverage for being a medical director? I don't know if you've come across that ever, but with some policies, they don't have automatic coverage for a medical director. You need to buy an extra policy for that. So when I say, make sure you understand your policy, looking out for any type of change in your practice, you should be communicating that and to make sure that, it's fully covered. So.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. A lot of doctors do outside expert witness review or medical director, and they assume that they're automatically covered, and they may very well need a separate policy. And unfortunately, if something does happen, they may find out they didn't have coverage. So that's a really great point. And then the other thing I'll just mention is that it is becoming extremely common. Well, first of all, claims made policies are less expensive, and they are the most common one that I see. Often the responsibility to buy a tail upon termination for any reason is on the physician, and we try and negotiate as best we can about the conditions related to that. Maybe it's how long the doctor's in the practice, maybe it's the reason for termination. But what I am seeing is a lot more doctors saying to their employer, hey, I would like to have an occurrence policy. I understand it's going to cost more, and taking less compensation or less bonus or something, just so when they go to leave, they don't need to worry about that tail. So this is definitely a trend I'm seeing, and I think it's a great thing for doctors to be asking about. So you make a mistake, I always say, if you don't ask, you don't know, right? There's nothing to lose by asking.
Yeah,
right?
and I think the moral of this discussion as well is asking those questions and treating it as if it is an important part of your business. So yes.
Absolutely. Now, I know you told me that there are things that you don't know about unless you ask, things like discounts that you can get, right?
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about that. What kind of discounts are available? How do doctors not know that they could get them?
Sure. Yeah. So working with someone that has experience within the healthcare sector and insurance, I think is obviously super important because they understand the loopholes and everything about the policy itself that's specific to their needs. So For example, I had a client who he was an independent contractor, anesthesiologist. He was just right out of school and going into the workforce. He worked at all these different locations, and because he was on a claims made policy, there's a thing called stepping. As you mature in your practice in a claims made policy, for the first 5 years, 3 to 5 years, your premium will increase. As your exposure increases, your premium increases to make up for it. So because he was an independent contractor on a claims made policy, what I'm trying to say is that I was trying to get him discounts. And so I went to the carrier and I said, listen, he is part of AMITA, which is a clinically integrated system. And because he's part of that, although he is an independent contractor, although that he has privileges at, one of those affiliated systems, I was able to get him a discount. And now that's embedded within his policy. So there are certain things that you ask for to the carriers to see if they have any of those hidden discounts, as well as participating in risk management courses that are provided by your insurance carrier. So I think a lot of them, see it almost as if it's a chore, because it does take time out of their schedule. With that being said, that time that's taken out of their schedule could also count towards their continuing education credits, their CMEs. So it goes CMEs, but if you also participate in that risk management course, some of the carriers will give you a little discount back for participating in those risk management courses.
Okay, great. Now, I guess one thing I'm curious is, because different clients tell me different things, is what kind of stuff might doctors be surprised to know is covered in their policy? So things like a claim against them for discrimination, or HIPAA violation. I mean, what have you seen any unexpected things that are actually covered within a policy other than just malpractice, or is that something you have to buy separately?
Yeah, so there are a lot of what it's called sub limits within a policy that most carriers have for things like HIPAA, sexual abuse, like miscellaneous coverages that people that they don't really think about. Some of them are automatically covered within their policy, things like telemedicine. Some insurance carriers, if you are practicing within your state that you're licensed in, you could have that telemedicine coverage. Because it's not big in writing, some people don't know if it's covered or not. You have to read through your policy limits, read through all of your policy documents, and consult with your broker on the different policies and what they offer.
So the other ones I've come across like investigation by licensing, on licensing issues.
And that some of them have that, and I think a lot of the time as well, some people don't realize that there is although there is that sublimit in there of those coverages, not all of them will suffice it's not enough coverage is essentially what I'm saying. So for example, that cyber coverage within a lot of policies have a sublimit for cyber coverage, but it's not nearly enough of what healthcare practices need. So although they're like, oh, do I have cyber coverage? Yeah, the short answer, yes, it's not enough. So things like that. So they do have hidden coverages in there, but the big question is that enough if something were to happen? And that's where you consult with your broker to see, based on your business analysis, is this what I need for my business? Or should we, look at increasing these limits? Do I need additional coverage for this? Because all policies, although they are, somewhat universal, a lot of them do offer different coverages. So
yeah, and I mean, I'm always recommending obviously a business will need business type insurance, general liability, and D&O insurance, and real estate and whatever coverages they need. But for individual doctors, I usually like to recommend they actually just get an umbrella coverage, which will give them some expanded coverages for things they may not expect. Let's say they're sued for disparagement, something like that. Or something that happens that's outside the coverage of their business outside their malpractice policy, but which is not a crazy thing, and it happens all the time. Again, it could be discrimination of some sort that's above and beyond practice limits. So I always say it's not enough just to have malpractice. You need that umbrella coverage, and it may not be something the younger doctor wants to spend money on, but sometimes you can't afford not to, right? So it can be expensive.
It's one of those things too, like I said before, insurance is kind of like a legal contract, and it's an investment that you make for your business in case something were to happen. So yes, to your point, what you were saying. And I think as well, working with a broker that takes the time to partner with you and understand your business through and through, they'll make sure those hidden coverages that you might not know about are included within there. So working with a broker who knows how to find a policy that's exclusive to your business and the coverages that you want or think you need. Working just with an insurance consultant who can walk you through the process, because it is very overwhelming and time consuming.
Right.
So working with someone who understands and knows what questions to ask you will alleviate a lot of the going back and forth and trying to understand exactly what you need. So
let's talk about another mistake that you mentioned to me, which is kind of waiting to the last minute. Speak to me about kind of the things that you see and why this mistake can hurt doctors.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually really big. And as we know, our medical professionals in our community just go above and beyond, and they don't have time for insurance. They just don't. And frankly, they probably don't want to deal with it, right? Just like most people. I pay my own insurance. I don't like dealing with my own insurance, just like business owners, right? Same thing. So with that being said, because they are so busy and they don't really want to deal with it, it gets put on the back burner. It's not something that is their first priority, which makes sense, right? With that being said, I go ahead and start the process about 120 days out from their renewal date. So starting that early allows us to have a conversation on what they want and need out of their renewal and understanding their business and how it's going to change for this, upcoming year. So like you said, with mistakes, like I said, I like to start 120 days out. That does not always happen because of how busy they are, right? So I have gotten an application that I had requested maybe 8 times over 120 days. I followed up and did my due diligence on making sure they get me the information and exposures that I need to send out to the marketplace. And then I get the application just a few days prior to their renewal date. And the carrier will turn around something quickly, but a lot of the time it's an increase. And how do you budget for something that's gone up 20 grand over a year? So just the importance of treating your insurance and working with someone who understands the timeline and knows how important it is to start early and get you those favorable terms that you need.
So what are you saying then? Like, there's a couple of things. One is, if you don't get it in time, you may not have it in time, right? But if the carrier does turn it around quickly, what you're saying is there can be some shock, and because you kind of find out and don't have a choice, you end up like not being able to plan accordingly for the increase. I mean, it might be the same increase had you submitted it 120 days before, right? Or you're not saying they charge you more if you get it in at the last minute, or are you?
No, I'm saying I wouldn't have enough time to analyze, send it out to market. If you send me back your exposures just a few days before renewal, it does not allow me enough time to send it out to the market and get good results back. It almost, sticks you with where you're at, and that does not do anyone of a good service. So,
So I guess if you don't get it in time, you may have to shut down your practice while you get it completed, or not be able to start a new job if it's not being completed, right? At least at bigger employers, it's a condition to your start date too, right? So if you
absolutely.
don't have it in time, you may not be able to start. So that's a really big mistake. And they do get busy, but we all get busy. I would say that's like just
Yeah,
got to be a priority.
absolutely.
Are there like any increased costs that might come along because the doctor's not paying attention either to renewal dates or deadlines? Is there any kind of expense that they might incur by not paying attention to those things, or is it really just the renewal that you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah. So say, if they weren't to send me a renewal application or any exposure update whatsoever, I'll go off of what their expiring revenue was. So say they made 500 grand in 2021, but then the next year they were only at 400 grand, but I didn't know that because they weren't communicating it to me. So it's a sticker shock. They're like, oh my goodness, why do I see this? I'm like, well, I have here that your revenues are 500,000. I did not get that updated amount. Therefore, I went off of what your expiring was from last
Right.
year because that's the only data that you've given me. So things like that, of understanding, what is needed and how it can benefit you. The more that you provide to the insurance carrier on your business, the more they're going to trust you as a partner. They're going to see, wow, this person is going to partner with me. They're a great risk. They're willing to share what their exposures are, things that they might run into. They're a great risk management partner. So,
Okay. All right. So one more question or one more mistake, I guess, that we're going to talk about is not shopping around when you leave the job or you shut down your practice or whatever it is for tail. And a lot of times the doctor will sign a contract where it says it's the doctor's responsibility and there is no option about who's going to pay for that. Now, in addition to that question, like shopping around in the marketplace to try and get the best price, and I know that there is a market for that, and you can tell me if that's a mistake the doctor's making, but also, well, why don't we start with that? Do you see that mistake happening? Do you see doctors just assuming they have to buy the tail without questioning it, whether they could get a better price somewhere else?
yeah. So I don't know if a lot of doctors or physicians, I should say, know that they can shop around for a tail. I think that they think that they need to stay with the incumbent because it is the easiest. If you give them a termination date, the insurance carrier termination date, they automatically will send out an invoice for tail coverage. They go ahead and pay it. So things like that.
Right. Whereas they could have saved themselves a bit if they went around to the marketplace. And obviously, I know it depends on, whether they got an indefinite tail or a limited tail and how, I always try to explain tail varies based on geography, specialty, years in practice, etc., multiple of your premium, but you can still shop around as long as it's a legit carrier, because you don't want to buy it from like, kind of a crappy carrier that goes out of business, right? Because then you got what you paid for, right? So we don't want that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've seen that happen. We've had that happen a couple of times.
Yeah, so there are only a few carriers that will do what they call a standalone tail, which would mean you're shopping it from what the incumbent provided. So yes, like you were saying, it is a bit of a sticker shock because some of the insurance carriers will charge almost 200%. And it's different for every carrier, but it's about the average is 200% of your annual premium for indefinite tail, which would cover you from the inception date of when you first started practicing until your termination date. So
what about not buying a tail? Like, do you see doctors doing that? And is that a mistake? I know, I gotta tell you, in some states, it's not uncommon. We don't see it where I'm sitting now, but is that a mistake in your opinion? Or, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I believe it's a big mistake, but that's obviously, I'm biased. I'm an insurance agent, so I have to, say that. But again, keeping that exposure open, depending on what type of doctor you are, I would always make sure that you know your state statutes. What are the statutes? as well as have you had any patients that you treated that were under the age of 18? So it kind of depends on the specialty and things like that. But again, understanding what your state also, requires, I think, and your employer based on your
Right.
contract,
Right.
they might require that. So,
Right.
but, some don't always.
Yeah. I mean, I see practices that might be going out of business or they feel the risk is low and they don't do a tail. But I think the biggest mistake in not getting a tail is and there are some states like Florida, for example, where it's pretty common, to maintain very low insurance or no insurance and to not buy a tail. And so if you do what everybody else does there, and then you try and go somewhere else one day, another state, most employers, most hospitals want to see that at no time did you not have coverage. So that gap ends up affecting your future career. So that's kind of a mistake that I see being made. Even if in the moment you're like, everybody's doing it, I hope that does not become the case in other states, because I think it's a risk for sure
Yeah.
for people to take. So I don't recommend that at all.
Yeah, right. And just like you said, how it kind of, the employers see that gap in coverage, right? Same thing with the insurance companies. They see that you went bare. They don't see you as a plausible risk to take on. If you are comfortable with not having coverage for that time period, those insurance carriers might not be, as willing to provide you with coverage due to you
Right.
not, being a responsible risk in doing your due diligence to make sure that you're covered. So
that makes sense. And I guess one related thing is, and I don't know if you've gotten involved with this at all, but it is a fact that the tail is a multiple of premium. So a lot of times people might shift to, let's say, a part-time schedule for some period of time, so that when they do tail out, their tail cost is less because the premium has been less. Is that something that you commonly see? Is it, I guess, a mistake not to, if you have the freedom to only work part-time or to be creative, is that viable? Or is it a mistake not to consider it?
Yeah. So a lot of people actually do that, especially when they are considered semi-retired, where they're still, writing scripts here and there, but they're not fully in their practice full time. They do that where they will start to work part-time, and then they ended up tailing out. So that is very, very typical that I see.
All right, perfect. So I think there's a lot of things, and hopefully this was helpful for people to think about if they don't really understand the way insurance works. They don't understand some of the nuances, some of the questions. For you and I, this is fairly standard, but for especially younger docs out there or people that have always just worked for someone else, they may not have considered these elements of how malpractice works. So Paige, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully everybody out there learned a lot. You can feel free to reach out to Paige. We'll have your info posted, or reach out to me if you have any questions. And this has been the Health Law Hotspot. Thanks for joining us. You can check out our other podcasts at ralaw.com. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, Paige.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
The Retzel Health Law Hotspot is made available by the firm and its attorneys for educational purposes and to provide general information, not to provide specific legal advice. Use of the Retzel Health Law Hotspot does not create an attorney-client relationship between you and the firm or any of its attorneys. The Retzel Health Law Hotspot should not be used as a substitute for competent legal advice, and you should contact an attorney in your state about any legal needs or questions you may have.